Welcome back to the class on professional writing. In the last class, we had discussed about the domain of professional writing. We looked at what professional writing means, and we had looked at the differences between what professional writing and other forms of writing, particularly the literary writing, are. We also looked at the elements of professional writing, within which we had discussed about four main features, the first of which was the need and the presence of organized and developed paragraphs. Today's class, we are going to discuss about the first feature, which is the organization and development of paragraphs in professional domain and for professional writing also. What I'm going to be discussing with you could be good both for professional writing as well as general writing. It is definitely followed in the zone of professional writing, but these are the techniques that you can also use while you are writing generally to bring more structure and impact to what you are writing. We will begin today's class. We will be looking at mostly two parts in the development and organization of paragraphs. First is the structure of a paragraph, and the second is the strategies to write a well-developed or an organized paragraph. I would like to discuss with you firstly the structure of a paragraph. On your screen, what you see is a diagrammatic representation of the structure of a paragraph. You can see that there is a topic sentence, there are supporting sentences, and there are concluding sentences. Sometimes it is just one sentence, sometimes depending on what you're writing on, you can have more than one as a concluding sentence or concluding sentences. But essentially, most of the paragraphs are going to be structured in this fashion. It is going to have a topic sentence, which is a mandatory element in all kind of paragraphs. Okay. Then comes your supporting sentences, and then comes the concluding sentence, right? The arrangement or the placement of these sentences needn't be always in a linear fashion, in the sense that it is not important that the topic sentence comes first always in a sentence, in a paragraph, and the supporting sentence follows it and the concluding sentence comes at the end. However, in professional writing, it is always recommended that the topic sentence is either the first or the second sentence in the paragraph to avoid any forms of confusions or ambiguities. Otherwise, there is no particular restriction to where the topic sentence can come. It can sometimes be at the beginning, it can be at the end, or sometimes you can find them right through the middle or elsewhere in the paragraph too. Now, we look at each of the elements involved in the structure of the paragraph. We look at topic sentence, supporting sentences, and concluding sentence one by one to understand what they mean and what they do for the development and organization of a paragraph. Let's move ahead. First, we are going to discuss about topic sentence. We look at what is a topic sentence and how does it function, or how can we write an effective topic sentence? What are the techniques that we can use to write a good topic sentence? What is topic sentence? Topic sentence is that particular sentence in any paragraph that is used to make a claim about the topic that you would be writing. It is essentially an argument, right? So, then one of the qualities of topic sentence should be that it should be arguable in nature. It shouldn't be a statement of fact. It should be something that the supporting sentences, when it follows in the paragraph, must be able to prove or add to. Okay. So, to begin with, topic sentence is a claim that is made about the topic that the paragraph represents or talks about. Second part of it is that it reveals the main point or the purpose of the paragraph. Now, we have already seen how purpose is a very, very important part. Defining the purpose or knowing the purpose is how it is a very important part of all kinds of writing, and particularly professional writing. So, the topic sentence also then bears the burden of defining or declaring the purpose of, or the main point of, or the central theme of what the author wants to write. Okay. It should also, now just because it carries the topic and the central theme, it does not mean that the topic sentence sits separately from the different sentences, the other sentences in the paragraph, it needs to be written in such a way that it ties up well with the rest of the sentences, which includes the supporting sentence and the concluding sentence. Right? So, topic sentence then forms the the central theme. It is something that declares the central purpose or the central theme of the topic to the reader. We will look at how topic sentences function, or how can you identify them in a particular paragraph. What are the forms in which they can appear to you? Now, the first is complex sentences. You already know what complex sentences are. Complex sentences are the combination of a dependent clause and an independent clause, which means any complex sentence is going to have at least one independent clause and one dependent clause, right? Majority of the paragraphs, especially if you are looking at an essay or any other forms of complex writing, right, like say research paper or an article in a magazine or in a newspaper, anything, any general form of writing in real life is going to have a lot of complex sentences. Mostly the sentences that we use in our real life writing are complex sentences, right? So, topic sentences usually have a tendency to use complex sentences because they have better scope to represent things in its entirety than say a simple sentence, okay, or a declarative sentence, right? So, which is why complex sentences are very commonly and very popularly used to write topic sentences. That does not mean that complex sentences are used only to write topic sentences. You can very well find them written as supporting sentences or concluding sentences even, but particularly with respect to topic sentences, it is suggested that you use a complex sentence to better represent the idea or the topic that you want to discuss with the reader, right? You want to talk to the reader about. Now, another method, another structure that a topic sentence can adopt is of a question format. Now, we know human beings are very curious by nature, and if you can posit question to people, it stimulates the reader to think further on that, and the person would be curious to know what is written further in the paragraph. So, especially when you're writing about something that has not been explored yet, or something that is intriguing enough, something that is fascinating, usually a technique, or if you want to make your readers feel intrigued and fascinated and look forward to reading what you have written, a good method or an effective method to also use is, the third part is pivot. What does pivot mean? We know what a pivot means. Pivot is another name for pivot can be the center point, or say the fulcrum, the point where everything joins. Now, what is the significance of something like a pivot in paragraph writing is, sometimes when you are writing a paragraph, midway through the paragraph you would like to change the course of direction that you have undertaken. But in such a paragraph which is intended, where the author intends to take a change in the direction, to change the course of direction in which the person has been writing, topic sentence can become that particular pivotal point where this turn happens, which means the topic sentence will then indicate that they are going to change the direction of writing, right? How can the topic sentence do that? This is part of the strategy of writing effective paragraph, but to talk about how that happens to a topic sentence, how it can work as a pivot, a juncture where the author can turn the direction, change the direction of what they are writing, it is by using transitional devices. We will discuss about the strategies, we will discuss about transitional devices when we talk about the strategies of writing. Now, moving on, we look at the supporting sentences now. Supporting sentences generally follows the topic sentences, and their task is to either prove, add or elaborate on what has already been said in the topic sentence. So, topic sentence talks to you about the main theme, it introduces the writer to the central theme, the topic or the subject of the paragraph. The supporting sentences then are tasked to add or elaborate on this particular point that has been made. Okay. So, in a way, the supporting sentences are what you can call as the meaty layer. Okay. How would they look like? These could be statements, so these could be sentences that give reasons. Okay. Now, all of this, whether it gives reasons or it cites facts or gives examples or use quotations, depends on the topic that you have chosen and what you have decided to write about it. Definitely, no prize for guessing that. But if we have to understand how a supporting sentences can look like, I think these points would help us. Now, the last part of the layers in a paragraph, the structure of a paragraph, it is called the concluding sentence. Now, concluding sentence is a little different from both topic sentence and supporting sentence with respect to its very presence in the paragraph, right? So, what we are discussing is essentially a body paragraph, right? There are different kinds of paragraphs. So, if you look at an essay, you know that the general structure of an essay would be introduction, body and conclusion, right? So, if that is a structure, then there has to be an introduction paragraph, there has to be a conclusion paragraph, and what comes in between is then referred to as the body paragraphs, right? So, what we've been discussing is mostly applicable to body paragraphs. Introduction paragraphs and conclusion paragraphs look a little different than body paragraphs. Body paragraphs, particularly with respect to concluding sentence, plays a little differently. If the body paragraph is part of a longer essay, okay, then it is not necessary that every paragraph within that essay, every body paragraph has its own separate concluding sentence, right? However, if the body paragraph that you are writing is a standalone paragraph, if it is a single paragraph, a standalone paragraph, then the concluding sentence becomes mandatory, without which the sentence or the paragraph seems to look having ended abruptly. Okay, it does not get its closure, it does not get its required ending, and it looks very out of the place to the reader who reads it, right? So, for any standalone paragraphs, single paragraphs, concluding sentences are very, very important. But if these body paragraphs are part of a longer essay, a longer text, a longer narrative, then it is not essential that you include a concluding sentence for every body paragraph, right? Keep this in mind. This is a very important aspect with respect to the organization of writing and particularly in general about the organization of writing, important for that, and in particular also for the concluding sentence as such. Okay, so that's the first point on the slide as well, that it is a mandatory segment in a standalone paragraph. Now, what is the function of a concluding sentence? To restate, these are the few points that you can see. These are the few types of sentences that you can see as, you can find as concluding sentences in a paragraph. Okay, so what are those? The first one, the concluding sentence may look like something that makes a suggestion. Okay, so if you have a sentence that is making a suggestion at the end of the paragraph, then that can be a good concluding sentence. It can also be a sentence that recommends, that gives recommendations to the reader, right? It can be that which summarizes the point. So, we talked about this. So, you have the supporting sentences and the topic sentence, and the concluding sentence could look like then a summary, okay, of what has already been discussed by these two. So, it can be a summary statement too. And the last part is, it could be something that offers a final observation. So, this usually happens in paragraphs that talks about opinions, right? So, this is how the concluding sentence of a paragraph can look like. We will move on to now the strategies for writing a good paragraph, right? Now, two very important features, logistic features that is important to write any good paragraph, whether it is in the professional writing domain or in general writing spaces, is first the unity and second the coherence. Okay, unity and coherence are treated differently by people, but then they act together when you talk about the development and organization of a paragraph. Now, what is unity? When you talk about the unity of a paragraph, you are referring to the maintenance of a single theme in the writing of a paragraph, right? So, the idea is, when you are writing a paragraph, when you are composing a paragraph, make sure that there is only one idea that is discussed per paragraph. Do not bring together more than one, do not bring too many ideas, themes together and discuss them in a single paragraph. Ideally, just keep one idea per paragraph. This particular feature of a paragraph or this particular characteristic of a paragraph is referred to as the unity. Okay, and unity ensures that there is a good clarity to the reader who reads what you have written, right? So what unity says is that the components of a paragraph must present and point towards a single idea, okay, and then it should develop itself into a wholesome idea for the reader. All right. So that is what unity means. Coherence is a part of unity, or it works together with unity in order to help you write an effective paragraph. Coherence is basically the logical continuity that is required to write a paragraph, right? So as you move from the first to the second to the third sentence in a paragraph, all these first, second, third sentences must be connected to each other logically. They should not look like they belong to different spaces or from different domains, right? All of them should be tied together. Coherence basically means tied together, right? They should have a logical flow. The sentences that you write in a paragraph, within the paragraph and between the paragraph, if it is a longer form of write-up like a long essay or a long text, right? Both between the sentences and between the paragraphs, this logical continuity needs to be maintained in order to write an effective paragraph, right? So unity and coherence are then two very important features of paragraph writing, and both of them work together, they act together in the production of an effective readable paragraph, okay? Now, we will look at the strategies for unification first. Now, the first part is, like I told you, there is a good deal of overlap between unity and coherence. So look at it. The very first point under strategies is that ensure the logical continuity of the idea presented in the paragraph. So this is what I've been talking to you about. So basically, the first strategy to make a paragraph unified or to ensure unity is to make it. Now, the second strategy here is to repeat the words, repeat the key words, unity of writing. Now, how does it ensure unity? When you repeat the key words, when you write them again and again, you are emphasizing the fact to the reader that, or you are constantly reminding the reader that this is the topic that we are talking about. Okay, this is the topic that you're reading about. So repeating the keywords is also then a very essential strategy to ensure that there is unity within the paragraph, right? And the last part is to use transitional words, right? So transitional words is again a very important device. Using them, transitional devices are very important for both unity and coherence, right? So to ensure that there is good flow between the sentence and to make sure that the whole idea is tied together around one single point. For both these purposes, transitional words or transitional devices, they play a huge role in writing. So they can help you to talk about something when you want to add something to the paragraph, when you want to contrast with something that has been already written, or when you want to conclude, right? So look at an example like this to give you a clearer example of this. What is a transitional device? Look at words like furthermore, moreover, additionally, in addition to. All of these are examples of transitional devices which helps you to add to the given point, right? So if the author wants to continue in the same direction of their writing, right? If they want to continue writing in the same direction, then they can use the transition devices that are used to add, like the ones that I just mentioned, right? Now imagine if the person wants to contrast, the person wants to draw contrast, then they have to use those kind of transitional devices that help you show a change in the direction of writing. Example, nonetheless, nevertheless, despite, however, although, though, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, to conclude, again, to sum up, you can use transitional devices or phrases like to sum up, to conclude, in conclusion, right? All of these are then transitional devices that help you to establish unity and coherence in your writing. Okay, they help you smoothly transition from one sentence to the other or between one paragraph to the other without feeling any sort of abruption. Okay, now the second part under this is the strategies for making an argument. So we already looked at how we can ensure unity, how we can unify the work that we are writing. Another thing, an important part would also be to look at how to make an argument, right? When to use what. So look at this. These are very important, especially if you are a beginner and if you have had no experience of writing before this, then this would serve as a good starting point for you to now begin writing, right? So you can use some of these techniques to ensure that you are writing effectively. What is the first one? The first strategy to make an argument could be to use an example, right? So you have made a claim, you have something to claim, you have written that sentence, and now to elaborate it further, you can use an example, right? You use an example that ties well with the argument that you have made, and then further your argument based on the example that you have written. So that's the first technique. The second technique is to tell a story or narrate an anecdote, okay? Particularly if you're writing personal paragraphs, right? So say you are writing a travel blog, right? Or if you're writing your experience with a particular gadget that you have bought, okay? Or something that you have purchased online, okay? Or say a pilgrimage that you have undertaken, okay? Or if you're writing about say an experience. So anything that is experiential, particularly personal experience, can be written in the fashion of a narrative paragraph. You can use a narrative paragraph, so you can use your anecdote, you can tell your story and use a narrative fashion to build on what you want to write, right? So narrative paragraphs are then going to use a lot of personal pronouns, I, you, we, they, he, she, it, right? So personal pronouns are used in abundance in all kind of personal paragraphs, right? So your purpose will then decide the medium, the style, the pattern, anything that you are going to choose. So whichever pattern or whichever style or whichever strategy fits well to the purpose, you should be only choosing that, right? Okay, so now the third one is use a compare and contrast method if the analysis requires the subtleties and nuances of a related event. So keep this in mind when you're writing a compare and contrast paragraph. A lot of people would think that compare and contrast paragraphs are used to talk about similarities and differences. You are right. You're partially right that compare and contrast paragraphs are used to talk about the differences and similarities, but keep in mind that we do not use this paragraph to talk about the obvious differences and similarities between two components, right? So it is not used to talk about say table and chair. Okay, the idea of a compare and contrast paragraph is not to differentiate between chair and table, because there are obvious differences between chair and table and we know that, okay. But when do you use compare and contrast? When you have to, like the slide mentions, that when you have to talk about the subtleties and nuances, when you have to talk about the intricate details and the similarities and differences between those intricate details, that we use the compare and contrast method. So to give you an example, like I told you that you do not use it to differentiate between table and chair, right? But what you can use it for is to talk about two different types of chairs or two different types of tables, right? So now we have narrowed it further. We are now talking about specificity. We are talking about very detailed things, the subtleties involved in the two different kind of chairs, the details, the nuances between these two types of chairs, right? So compare and contrast is used for, it's a method that is used to analyze, right? So they are usually used in analytical paragraphs to understand the subtleties and nuances between two related entities or events or person or a period of time, etc. Right? So another example could be to compare and contrast between the Elizabethan age of literature and the Victorian age of literature, or World War I and World War II, okay, or between two dynasties that ruled a country. So all of these are the kind of topics that can be used to compare and contrast, right? Remember, compare and contrast is not used to talk about obvious difference and similarities between entities, right? Okay, now the next one is the cause and effect strategy. Cause and effect strategy is usually used when you want to tell your reader that one event leads to the other, right? So, or when one becomes the cause to the other, the cause and effect fashion can be used. So, whenever you are able to correctly identify one leading to the other form of situation in a particular topic or an event, you can go ahead and use the cause and effect strategy, right? The next one is usage of or citing data statistics. So, whenever you want to represent anything that is factual, or when you want to go about with something in a more scientific fashion, okay, which is when you want to keep away opinions, when you do not want to talk about personal experiences and you want to only base things on facts and science, then those kind of paragraphs are best written by citing data, figure, statistics, etc. Okay. Now, the last one is definition, okay, using the strategy of writing a definition paragraph. So, definition paragraphs or definition strategy is most useful when you are introducing somebody to a new concept, right. So, whenever there is a requirement to introduce someone to a new concept, you are going to use the definition method, right. So, you give the definition and then further your argument based on that. Keep in mind that in real life what you are going to see are not individual paragraphs which are either compare and contrast type or cause and effect type or definition type or example based. What you are mostly going to encounter are what we call as embedded patterns of paragraph. What does embedded pattern mean? That within a paragraph you can have several kinds of these different patterns or this different kinds of paragraphs within a single one, which is why which is what the phrase embedded pattern mean. Okay, there's an embedding. So you can have like a paragraph which is which compares and contrasts, but then within that comparison and contrast you will have examples being given to further to elaborate on the particular point being made, right. This is possible. Or you can have, say, a narrative paragraph where somebody is talking about a personal experience and they can bring in say an example, or they can bring a compare and contrast within that, right. So, in reality when you are writing, it is actually embedded patterns or embedded paragraphs that you actually produce rather than say something that is of a particular type. If your topic or if your purpose is very clearly defined to use just one of them, then that is a different story. But in general, in reality, when you write, usually what we do is a combination, that we use a combination of all of them together, particularly in longer texts, reflective essays, okay, large forms of, longer forms of writing, okay, research papers, etc. They're going to use a combination of these techniques, okay, in order to present the point, right. So, these are a few strategies that you can use to further an argument, to make an argument within a paragraph. Now, let's quickly look at an example to understand the points that we have been discussing till now. So, the first part we are going to do is to look at the structure of a paragraph. You have a very simple paragraph in front of you, right. So, the very first sentence that you see here: traditionally, Flemish comic book culture was dominated by long-running comic series with an unchanging cast of characters. Okay, we'll read further and then look at the structure. Most of those comics, initially devised as gag strips or series in newspapers and magazines, are now facing the same problems as the traditional print media in which they are published. For more than half a century, annual compilation albums of such comic strips were one of the main sources of entertainment for young people in Flanders, with print runs of more than 400,000 copies. Today, comics are part of a much wider entertainment context, competing with films, games, animation shorts, the internet, social media, and so on. Right? So, this is your paragraph. If you look at the first sentence, traditionally, Flemish comic book culture was dominated, so on and so forth, clearly becomes the topic sentence. It declares the topic of the paragraph to the reader. And what is the topic? We are going to talk about the comic book culture. Okay, so something about the comic book, that is very clear from the first sentence. So, in that sense, the very first sentence in this paragraph becomes the topic sentence, right? This becomes the topic sentence for us then, right? Okay. Now, I would like to remind you here that it is not the case always that the topic sentence appears at the beginning of the sentence. Sometimes it can be found elsewhere too. Okay, this happens to be a paragraph where it is found in the beginning. Why did I choose this? Because in professional writing, although in general writing topic sentences can be found elsewhere in a paragraph, in professional writing it is strongly recommended that your topic sentence always is used as the first sentence of the paragraph. This is to avoid any sort of confusion or ambiguities for the reader. Okay, so I am glad that we have a paragraph which has the topic sentence as the first one. Okay, now the other one, the sentences that you have on the screen which are color coded in blue, right? Most of those comics initially devised as gag strips till the 400,000 copies, that part becomes, they form the supporting sentences of the paragraph. How? Because the topic of the comic book culture or comic books is declared by the topic sentence, and all the sentences that you see in blue, they in some sense add to what has been told in the, or what has been written in the topic sentence, what has been declared in the topic sentence, right? So read it closely and you will see how they are tied together. And now the last one, today comics are part of a much wider entertainment context, competing with films, games, animation, shorts, the internet, social media and so on. It can be considered as a closing off statement for this paragraph. It needn't be necessarily a concluding sentence, because it does not give you any sense of conclusion. But look at it carefully. Today comics are part of a much wider entertainment context. If you remember the kind of sentences that can become a good concluding sentence, one of it was that it could be a kind of statement that winds up. Okay, it sort of summarizes what has been told about in the previous sentences, in both the supporting sentences and in the topic sentence. This does not summarize what has been written, but in a sense it adds to what has already been given, right? So remember, there was another of a kind of concluding sentence which offered a final observation, right? So I told you in mostly such kind of sentences appear in opinion paragraphs, but this paragraph again is an example where the concluding sentence has taken the form of a sentence that offers a final observation on what has been talked about in the previous sentences, right? So, is it a concluding sentence? Yes. Is it like a traditional concluding sentence? No. Okay, why is it so? Because this particular sentence has been extracted from a longer form of essay. So I told you, if you're talking about a longer form of text, then it is not necessary that all the body paragraphs are going to essentially have a concluding sentence. Nevertheless, this one has fulfilled the purpose, has fulfilled the structure of a paragraph by placing a sort of closing statement, which is like a final observation on the part that has already been spoken by the supporting sentences and the topic sentence, right? Okay. Now we are going to look at what do we looked at 3 strategies, okay, for unification. So we are taking the same example to understand how this particular strategy has been implemented and used in the paragraph that we just discussed. I have highlighted a few words and phrases for you to understand those strategies. Let's look at the green fonted one first, right? So comic book culture, comic series, comics, comic strips. Do you see it repeating? There are the word comic or comics keeps repeating. There is other place where comics, even in the last sentence, today comics are part of a much. Do you see that? So you see that the word comic repeats so many times in the same paragraph. So if you remember, one of the strategy that we discussed in the strategy of unification was repetition of keywords. So the keyword here, which sits in the topic sentence, comic or comic book culture, that particular word, the word comic, it keeps repeating everywhere in the paragraph to emphasize or to reiterate to the reader that the topic of this particular paragraph is comic series or comic strip, etc. Right? So this is how the strategy of repetition, okay, is implemented within a paragraph. Now look at those ones in red. Okay, all of these today. These traditionally, right? What are these? These are also examples of transitional devices. Remember the third strategy that we discussed in the unification strategy was using the usage of transitional devices to add, to contrast, right, to elaborate, right. The examples that we have here are traditionally, for more than half a century, today, right. Now these are not your traditional transitional devices which helps you to continue in the same direction or to change the direction. However, these are also important transitional devices that builds the link. Like look at the word traditionally, right. Traditionally is a device that is placed there to indicate the opinion of the author. So traditionally, the author thinks that traditionally Flemish comic book culture was dominated by long running comic series. So this word traditionally, that particular device is applicable to the whole of the sentence, right. So this is a point of view. This is how the author has represented his or her point of view traditionally. That is applicable to the whole of the sentence that follows. This is also a transitional device, right? So transitional devices can appear in the beginning of the paragraph. You can find them in the concluding sentence, or you can find them, basically you can find them anywhere in the paragraph. Their role is to act as gel and glue between these sentences to join them logically together. That function is done by traditionally in the first sentence. Another one, for more than half a century, right. This is another phrase that has been used. This is an example of an introductory phrase, right. This is also a very useful transitional device to show, to continue, to add and elaborate to what the paragraph has already been talking about. And in the last sentence, you have the word today. Now, what does today do? Today comics are part of it, gives the reader a sense of what is going on in the present. So, gives the sense of time. So, which means transitional devices can help you arrange your ideas spatially, right. It can help you arrange your ideas temporally. That is, it can give you a sense of time, it can give you a sense of space, and it can give you a sense of direction in which your argument or your write-up is progressing. That's the role, right. So these are a few strategies you can use for unification. I hope you have understood the techniques, the strategies, the methods that are employed in writing, particularly in professional writing. I'll see you again in the next class with the continuation of what we've been talking about. Thank you.